Hello, everybody, and welcome back to season two. This is the first episode of season two of Difficult Conversations. We have a fantastic show planned for you tonight. We have two outstanding gentlemen, both scholars, both family men, and both pillars of their community that are going to join us tonight. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the finer points of the BLM movement and what it means to them personally. So first, I'm going to bring on Pedro Rodrigues. Pedro is a young man that I grew up with. Actually, I'm a few years ahead of him, and that's why he's aged better than I have, just a little bit older. So Pedro is a family man, he's a businessman, and he also has a master's degree. So Pedro, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm currently reside in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, a little ways away from Stoughton, Mass. I currently work for IBM. Used to be a pretty big, well-known computer company back in its day, but they're now predominantly software. And I'm sure you've seen all their ads around. I got an MBA in business administration from Southern New Hampshire University, father of 3 children. I have a lovely wife who I met at Southern New Hampshire University, and just doing the typical, human being thing, living life and enjoying it as much as I can through this pandemic. So
that sounds good. Is there somebody there that wants to say hi? I see that there's somebody.
They were trying. They noticed I was on the phone, so they walked away.
Well, we're all about family here, so if they want to jump on at some point and say hi, please feel free to do that. So the second guest today is another gentleman. He's a businessman. He's a financial guru, and he is also a basketball junkie. So this is Andrew Ward, and he's a good friend of mine. Andrew, say hello to the people.
Hey, everybody. Good evening.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, brother.
Sure. I was born and raised in Boston. I went to Bentley University where I got a finance degree. Upon graduation, I got into the financial services business, and I've been in that industry ever since. I own a financial planning practice that works with individuals, families, and business owners on investing, insurance, and overall financial planning, cash flow management, etc. I also am the CFO of Jubilee Christian Church, where we're based out of Boston, but we have multiple locations, one in Stoughton and one in Worcester on the way very shortly. So my hands are full, not only from work, but I also have 3 children, ages 9, 8, and 6. So they keep me busy. And my 9-year-old is the emerging basketball star. So we're always in the gym, watching games, playing games, working out. So yeah, we are a basketball family for sure.
And I'm going to co-sign that about his son. The kid is dynamite. Well, a couple of years ago, wasn't he ranked nationally?
Yeah, in the top 5. I mean, these things, they see you at camps, etc. It's interesting, they're getting younger and younger as they, kind of evaluate these kids. But, my take is it's a long journey. So, continue to work hard and, things will progress the way they're supposed to progress.
Outstanding. Pedro, how old are your children?
7, 5, and 2.
Okay, so we're all kind of in the same boat. I guess I'm the OG. My oldest is 13. My son is 9. He's buddies with Andrew's son, and my youngest daughter is 7. So we're all kind of in the thick of it right now. The one thing I will tell you, gentlemen, is the mantra: bigger kids, bigger problems. Believe it.
It's real. It's real. It's real.
So I figured I'd start off today, and I have a video here that kind of describes the BLM basic, the Black Lives Matter movement as if you were talking to one of your children, which I always think that's the best way to explain things to even adults, is break it down to the lowest common denominator and just kind of just talk about it at its lowest level and then go from there. So I think that this is a great video, kind of bring us into the topic tonight. And I'm going to share it with everybody. So sit tight. I'm going to share it now.
Is not a threat. It's funny how the world has different time zones. How it could be Saturday on this side of the world and Friday somewhere else. Yet somehow, the United States of America is stuck in 1920. That was 100 years ago. Yet we're still fighting for our lives, for a place here. What did we ever do to make them hate us so much? I know for a fact they love our culture. They love to steal our braids, the way we talk, anything we call ours. But when it's that one white bad cop and that one innocent black person, that black person fears for their life. This is the world we live in. See, when I was younger, teachers used to ask kids what they wanted to be when they grew up. Some kids said famous. I was one of those kids. But now I changed my answer. The thing I want to be when I grow up is alive. How do I know that I'm gonna make it out alive if I'm suspicious doing nothing? If I'm suspicious when I'm at my own house, sleeping in my own bed? Why am I suspicious? Because I could have sworn from 1 to 3 I was the cutest thing. But when did I stop being cute and start being scary? Am I scary if I have a black hoodie? Am I scary if I wear a backpack? Am I scary if I do nothing? Am I scary? Does my dad scare you? Does my mom scare you? Does my auntie scare you? Because let me tell you something. We are not scary. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Tamir Rice, Dontre Hamilton, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, John Crawford, Ezell Ford, Walter Scott, Akai Gert, Stephen DeMarco Taylor, Tony Robbins, Miles Hall, Jamie Johnson, Antoine Rose, Stephon Clark, Jacob Blake. Say their names. You will earn my respect when I don't have to fear for my life or anybody else's. Until then, my respect will not come for free. Black Lives Matter.
All right. Powerful video. What do you think? So I'm going to start with Pedro. What did you think? How did that video make you feel, Pedro?
I think speaking as a parent, the voice of the child resonates with all of us, I think. And, we're all looking for a better future for our kids. And, it's unfortunate that we as Black men now have to have the conversations with our kids about race. And, this kind of really puts a microscope on it without going too gory into the details. So I think, it's a very powerful message, straight to the point.
Andrew, it's on you. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Pedro. The fact that it's a child's voice and a young girl's voice at that, it's sad to hear the emotion behind the statements being made. So, again, as a father, I would never want my daughter to feel that particular way. So, it has obviously an impact, which is the design of the video being put together anyway. So it did have an impact. And the impact to me was sadness. It created emotion. And I think, again, that's what it was intended to do. And it did.
So let's take gender out of it. So both of us, we're all Black. We all grew up, obviously we grew up Black. Did you recall feeling that way as a child at all, Andrew? Or, were there times that that your upbringing, you could identify with that thought process?
I wouldn't say I feared for my life. I mean, the interesting thing about me is my mother is actually white. So being biracial, I thought it was really interesting to not be, or to be viewed as Black, which, half of me is Black and, the other half is white. So it was somewhat conflicting to me to experience, things, racism and things of that nature and challenges just simply because of, the light color of my skin. So that to me was very kind of hard to process as a young man growing up. But I didn't fear for my life. It was just really kind of the complexities around, like, I am half white, but not being accepted in certain circles, or to, again, experience bouts of racism over the course of my upbringing was, it was difficult and hard to understand.
Pedro, same question to you.
Well, I mean, didn't we both grew up in Stoughton? I mean, it's more diverse now than it was when we were there. There was probably a handful or a dozen black kids when we were growing up. I think when I was in high school, I had the very, I guess, a gangbanger look. Baggy jeans, big clothes, do rag. So you get that, you get those looks when you're walking to the mall, and you get the the glances at you and people kind of looking over their shoulders. But I mean, being called the N word, even when I was in college, being in a state like New Hampshire and visiting friends in college in Maine, where it's really not diverse, and those kind of words are kind of free flowing. You never realize the damage that word can do to you as a person, and the rage that it can bring into you. And luckily, both the instances that had happened to me, it was people in cars. They just said it and drove off. So probably for the better, looking back at it. But I think in general, being even now when you're walking around with your kids, I think people don't look at it as such a big deal. But I think 10 years ago or so, it was.
Well, let me ask you this. So while I got you here,
Sure.
as far as Black Lives Matter goes, so do you feel, so the video that we just watched speaks to how you felt in that circumstance, even though they did mention like the white police officer aspect of it. Did you feel that way as far as police, and do you feel that way today?
No, I mean, I've never had any issues with police. I mean, I've been pulled over a handful of times, what have you, but I've never had any bad encounters to say, So I can't relate to that aspect by any means. I've always listened and complied to an officer when asked. I'm even a guy who gets pulled over, turns off his car, puts his hands on the steering wheel, just as precaution, and just, hey, letting the officer know the hair in my hands. I'm not trying to do anything funny. So it's never been anything I can speak or relate to.
Andrew, same question.
I would say traditionally in the past, I wasn't necessarily as cognizant or as fearful or had some emotion around, or I guess the word I would use is being uncomfortable. I would say now I'm somewhat uncomfortable when I see police, or if I'm around them. Obviously not you, but but I am a little bit more apprehensive than I would say I have been ever in my life. I never really was kind of cognizant of it, but with recent things that have gone on, I'm somewhat uncomfortable. Not overly so, but I am somewhat uncomfortable.
Yeah, there's an old saying that ignorance is bliss.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the type of thing where, correct me if I'm wrong, do you feel that way more now because it's so in your face now in the media, it's everywhere in the media?
Totally.
Okay.
I think, there's things that have gone on, obviously, in my 41 years on this earth that, I might not have gotten exposed to because there was no social media, or, as a young kid, you're not watching the news or paying attention to, what's going on in the newspaper like we are now, which we have, access to information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When we were all coming up, the internet was just, it hadn't even, started yet. So
Dial-up, AOL.
so,
Oh, pick up the phone. You broke my connection.
yeah. So, but now with the internet and social media and, all the access to information that takes place, it just is bringing things to the surface, and it's putting it right in front of our faces. More readily available than I think things have been traditionally in the past.
100%. So I'm going to bring you back a little bit to a situation that happened when we were 15-ish, Andrew, Rodney King.
Oh, yeah.
So when we were coming up, like Pedro, you're a little bit behind us. You were in elementary school when this happened. Don't smile too big, buddy. All right, you're right there. You're in the great.
I'm younger than you too, by the way. I'm younger than you. You say 15 and shit.
Let's pump our brakes, gentlemen. All right, we're all in the 40 club.
That's right.
Well, anyway, so when Rodney King happened, I was in high school, and that had a profound effect on me. And like most young people of color, young Black kids, when that happened, I went through my I hate the police stage, and every cop's a bad cop, and all that, and man, so I mean, y'all know the story. Y'all know? Did I tell you about the story about what started changing things for me? So my junior high school, we just finished a basketball game when we were playing at one of the faraway towns, Pedro. We were playing at either King Philip or Franklin, one of those places where it took a long time to get back to Stoughton. Tuesday night game. So we get back to school, and the school's locked. And obviously, this is before cell phones and all that. It's like 1991, 92. So it's me and this one cheerleader, this white girl that I graduated with, and it was raining cats and dogs. It was one of those cold, like winter rains, like a 36, 37 degree rain. So it was miserable. So we made a decision just that we were just going to walk. So she lived down by, down probably about a mile and a half from the school, down by the Hanson School. And y'all know where I grew up. I grew up way down by the farm. So I grew up about 4 miles away from the school. So we decided to start walking home. We started walking home, and a police officer pulls up behind us. I could see the white spotlight coming from behind us. And I hear him over the loudspeaker say, "What are you doing?" So I'm thinking, this is my Rodney King moment. Here I am with this white girl. It's raining out. It's dark out. There's nobody around. So I'm scared out of my mind. So lo and behold, so I'm pointing to like the name on my jacket. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's me. It's Dean. Everybody knows who I am. I play basketball, football. And he's like, I'm not talking about that. He's like, what are you doing walking in this weather? So instantly, I kind of relax a little bit, but I'm still apprehensive because I didn't know where he was going with this. So he tells us, get in the car. So, we get in the car. I sit up front next to him. He makes sure that I'm sitting up front next to him. And the young lady sits in the back. We drop her off first. Then it's this cop and I, white cop, and he's driving me home. So I'm thinking this guy, to me, again, I'm 15, 16 years old. This guy seemed like he was a million years old. He's probably like 30, but at that, to a teenager, I'm thinking this dude's old, right? Next thing you know, that he looks over at me and he turns up the radio, and it's 94.5 WZOU, the Zoo Cat. And I know y'all remember that was like the first hip hop station. Yeah. So he puts this on, and that just started a whole conversation back and forth. Because I said, you listen to hip hop? And he turns and looks at me and smiles, and he says, "What am I supposed to listen to?"
Right.
My whole world up with that. So this guy drives me home. We sit in our pot, and he's sitting in my my driveway, and him and I talk for it must have been at least a half hour, 45 minutes. And I can see the curtains going back and forth from my living room. My parents are wondering what this cruise is doing in their driveway.
Right.
So we must have scared the hell out of my parents, thinking that this guy's there to make a death notification. Right? Because that's, maybe psyching himself up to go up to the door and say, "Hey, something happened to your son." My parents are wondering where I am. They hadn't heard from me. And this guy and I were just becoming fast friends. And that kind of changed my view. And that kind of made me realize that I was doing to him what people would do to me whenever I was wearing a hoodie, or whenever I had my untied work boots and my baggy jeans. And I just completely stereotype this guy. And there's more to the story, but that's essentially what happened that night. And to this day, this guy and I are still friends. So that's when I started realizing that maybe I needed to take a step back and start looking at things on a case-by-case basis. All right. So that being said, we have a couple people in the audience that want to say hello. So, Brendan Stahl, we know him. Andrew and I know him. He's one of the great youth coaches around town. Great guy. He's a true Stoughton guy. My mother's showing some support. Hi, Ma. It's nice to see you. Darlene Howell is in attendance. Hello, Darlene. And of course, one of our favorite people to have on the show, Michael Powell, is there, and he has a comment. So he says, "What type of conversation are you having in your home about law enforcement? If the message framed in a negative light, i.e., all cops are bad, don't trust any cops, etc., is that shaping the perspective of young people in the home?" So I'll start with you, Andrew, since your oldest is a little older than Pedro's. So what kind of conversations are you having at home? I'm going to give you the whole screen on this.
Yeah, I mean, I really haven't had a tremendous amount of conversations with my kids around cops. I think that, the work that I try to do as a father and that their mother tries to do is to create an environment of respect and one of, honor to those that are not only older than you, but that are in, positions of quote unquote power or responsibility. So, as it relates to having conversations of, specifically about police, I can't say that I've had them that directly. Now, my kids are actually only a quarter black, so they're even lighter than me. So they haven't really had a ton of exposure to what's kind of going on around us. And, as we referenced earlier, in social media and, what's online, et cetera. That stuff I don't think really has resonated with them the way it might have resonated with you, Dean, or Pedro, or myself, because they don't identify, either as black or white, which is kind of cool, but they haven't kind of felt, the fear for their life or anything like that. So,
do you have a plan, Andrew? Is this something that with everything that's going on, I'm sure that you realize you're on the clock.
Oh yeah.
And at that point, you got to have a conversation like, what is Black Lives Matter?
Yeah.
What does all lives matter? What does blue lives matter? What is your plan for that?
I mean, I think, again, it's to be respectful of those around you, particularly those in law enforcement. I mean, they have a job to do. And so, me trying to create, again, an environment where hopefully they don't have interactions with the police is something that, I'm trying to create and instill in them. I mean, obviously we can't insulate our children from everything that goes on in the world, but again, trying to do the best job that, I can to make sure that, again, they're steered away from a lot of the negative influences that may be surrounding them, or, bad decisions that say, I was making when I was growing up. So I would say, it's probably a timely discussion, particularly with my 9-year-old. But as of right now, I haven't had anything kind of real direct and specific with him. And he's a real sharp kid, so, he would be able to understand the conversation. I have no doubt about that.
Pedro, what say you? Your children are a little younger. Have you had the conversation? And if not, what's your plan for having this conversation?
To kind of go off what Andrew was saying, I think obviously teaching your kids about respect is big, right? And that doesn't matter who it is, really. You treat people how you want to be treated. And I think that's where it starts. I'm big, especially with my boys, being 7 and 5, is just always enforcing, make better choices. And even with little things that they're doing here, and hopefully that'll escalate to even as they grow up and they're out of the house, and making sure they're making those better choices. I think that's big. And trying to get them to get into that mind frame now of, before you do something, think about it. So, and hopefully that grows and hopefully in theory will lead to better decisions as they get older. As far as the police conversation, no, I can't say I have. I know when the whole George Floyd incident did happen, I think CNN and Sesame Street did a special on racism, and we had that conversation. And again, kind of like Andrew's, and even you, Dean, our kids are all biracial. Your kids are more prevalently darker, and where my kids are, my youngest isn't as dark as my oldest or with the baby. The baby actually looks more like me than the rest of them, of course. but those are things I do concern myself with, right? You know, are they going to have those issues? And I've talked to my oldest about it because he looks more Hispanic than he does black, and because he's got the mulatto skin, and he's got the curly hair. It's definitely he just doesn't have white characteristics, besides the lighter eyes. But that doesn't always mean you're a Caucasian of any sense. So I just having those conversations about race and making sure that they're not experiencing anything right now at their age because of what they look like.
So
that's kind of.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. That's been the extent of our conversation. It's just making sure that they're currently not being picked on because of what they look like, and or if I show up to one of their school events, do they get picked on because of what their dad looks like? Things like that. That just want to make sure that they're not going through any kind of trauma or of any sense or any extent, I should say.
I hear you. So I'm going to bring Andrew back in for this question because this is, I think, part of our jobs as parents, and I'm gonna and you're gonna have to pardon me, guys. I'm gonna put words in your mouth for a quick second. Part of our job as parents is we want to protect our kids. Obviously, we want to protect them physically from physical harms, but we also want to protect them from emotional harms and things that could affect their emotional well-being. So, do you feel like the timetable to have these conversations has been pushed up because of the availability, because of the fact that more than ever, teachers are sharing their personal opinions in classrooms more than ever? And again, like, I'm not saying that's good, bad, or indifferent. That's maybe another topic for another day. But whether we like it or not, it's happening. So what do you feel about the time frame of these conversations? Do you feel like you can wait until I started having these conversations more and more with my father when I was probably closer to 10? But part of that is also, like you said, it was a little different for me growing up than it was for your kids because I am very dark. And like Pedro said, at the time that I was growing up in Stoughton, there were very few people of color in town, and we all knew each other, where we lived, what we drove. It was that few of us around town. So you kind of had to be on your P's and Q's, and your parents had to give you the talk. So talk a little bit about that, about your time frame really quick. We'll go to Andrew.
I think every situation is different. I think it's the maturity of the kid that you are addressing as well. So that plays a factor in what you're willing to share with them and expose them to, depending on age. But in general, I would agree. Yeah, maybe we are thinking in today's times that kids generally may be at a younger age when we're talking about some of these things. But I would look specifically. I've got 3 children, and so each one is different. And so I'm going to treat each one differently according to their maturity level. But what I would want to get ahead of is some of the things that they could potentially be exposed to out in the world, and them not kind of really being prepared to handle some of those things. Again, they're children, so they're going to process obviously differently, not as adults do. But if we can prepare them just slightly more ahead of them where they are, on their own, then I think that's a benefit to them as they grow up. We talked a little bit about Rodney King, but the thing that resonates with me is more the Charles Stewart situation, back when I was probably 8, 9, 10 years old. And, a
little background on Charles Stewart for some people that A might not remember, or some people might not be old enough that are listening in.
Yeah. So Charles Stewart had a pregnant wife who he had driven into a doctor's appointment at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and ended up killing her, murdering her. And at the time, Brigham and Women's proximity to Mission Hill, which is predominantly Black and brown area of the city.
Back then it was, not now, but back then it was.
Yeah, it's transformed a little bit. Yeah. But yeah, the BPD pretty much turned the city upside down based on Charles Stewart's rendition of, who he saw rob them and ultimately, shoot and murder his wife. And so they turned the city upside down. I mean, if you were black and, could walk and talk at the same time, they were going to pull you over and harass you. And at the time, my father had gotten pulled over. And, that stuff was exposed to me at a young age because obviously my father was upset. And, these conversations between him and I were happening at that time. And it turned out that Charles Stewart was the one who actually murdered his wife, and he ended up committing suicide. And so the whole thing was, completely made up. But the real major outcome was that, black and brown communities in Roxbury and in Dorchester were turned upside down for this quote unquote suspect that never existed.
Pedro, are you familiar with that case, or is this the first you're hearing of it? Again, we're that age gap where maybe you might have missed this.
I know I got some grays, Dean, but I'm not that old, but I'm really not. I'm only 35. You said 40 earlier. I was like, I didn't hit that yet. Don't rush it, bro.
Oh, you're 35?
Yeah, man.
I'm sorry, man. Your beard tells a different story, brother.
I told you. I said.
I had to get you back. All right. So yeah. So that was definitely before you. You were very, very, very little when the Charles Stewart thing happened. But Boston had an issue with stop and frisk, like Andrew was alluding to, where the suspect was supposed to be 6'2", 260 pounds, dark skin. So I basically just described myself. So then Andrew would get stopped and get frisked. Right. Somebody that there's no way you could confuse the two of us. And it just went way over the top. And that kind of stuff started happening with Charles Stewart, where like anything else, most police officers probably had the very best of intentions, and then a couple people went way overboard and started like using it as a right to just stop and harass and embarrass anybody they could. Mm-hmm. So we do have a question here that from Bob. Bob wants to know: do we believe the messaging of social justice progress is being derailed by the Black Lives Matter organization?
I'm gonna say yes and no.
Anyone jump in? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm gonna say yes and no because I think it all depends on what stories you're listening to or where you're getting your information from. Because there are some, I would say, radical parts of the Black Lives Matter movement that are, condoning the looting and the violence. And, that gives people a bad taste in their mouth. And I'm not saying that it's right or wrong to have that, but there are good parts of the movement, right? You're seeing you're seeing the athletes and the professional sports backing the movement. I can't say enough about LeBron. I don't like the guy personally, but as an athlete, he's phenomenal. But the things he does off the court it's beyond any athlete I've ever seen do. But, he's gotten together with...
Man. Huh? What did LeBron ever do to you?
It's a different conversation. Let's stay on topic. But honestly, I think, but him and a bunch of other athletes are getting together, setting up voting booths, trying to really push to help with, voting suppression that's going on. So, I think, it has a lot to do with the Black Lives Matter movement, right? They're trying to help, especially those communities where are predominantly Black, or they're having issues with voting, that they're coming together and making sure that the resources are available. So I think that's again, like I was telling you earlier, it's not a black and white answer. So I think, you got to know where you get your information from and understanding who's doing the right things and what parts, just like there are good cops, there are bad cops, there's good and bad parts of Black Lives Matter movement. It's just kind of
Andrew, fantastic answer, Pedro. You got a tough act to follow, Andrew.
I think there's got to be tangible, measured outcomes, and I am not someone who are paying a tremendous amount of attention to the movement itself, but because to me the statement of Black Lives Matter is so powerful in itself, and I think that the impact that either the movement or families are doing individually or us as friends in what Black and brown people are doing together is the most powerful thing. But there's got to be tangible, measured outcomes that are taking place in real change. real in, air quotes. Unless we're having that real impactful change, I mean, I don't really know, what's the whole point of anything that we're doing. So I wouldn't say that the organization is necessarily derailing anything, but I mean, it's bringing some things to the forefront, and that's a positive thing because it's keeping things on the front burner, so to speak. But what are the tangible measured outcomes? I mean, at the end of the day, see, now I'm gonna get a little off topic, but at the end of the day, Black and brown families need to build wealth, and they need to catch up with the wealth gap, and they need to stabilize families and households. I mean, a lot of us, unfortunately, have grown up in broken homes, which has, problems that create generations worth of problems. So, it's how do we build our wealth? How do we drive home ownership in our communities? How do we do what we're supposed to do within the four walls or the context of our homes? And then how do we support each other? And so I think that monumental change is, has to go against everything that we've faced as a community over the last, however many years.
Fantastic answer. So we got another comment here that speaks to what you're talking about. So a woman that I'm fairly familiar with, Patricia Jenkins, aka Ma, says, gentlemen, you may want to know how your children are feeling about what they are seeing and how they are processing what they see. And that's a good piece of advice from an excellent parent. I'm not just saying that because she's my mother. I'm saying it because the proof is in the pudding. Let's take me out of the mix. My brother is a college graduate, and he's on his way to becoming the winningest coach at Randolph High School. He's changing the lives of young men. And I have a sister that's very successful in the business world, and she's down in Washington, D.C., and she has a master's degree from Harvard. So clearly my parents, they did something right, at least with two of the kids, and then there's me. So who knows? The jury's still out on me at this point.
I agree.
So I'd expect nothing less out of you. So we have another question from Megan. Megan wants to know, how do you explain to your children about racism in this movement? And when do you think is the right age or time to have this discussion? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So Megan, welcome. I don't know if you missed it. We actually just went over that a few minutes ago, where we talked about the fact that as parents, our job is to protect our children both physically and emotionally. And maybe the timeline on having this difficult conversation with our children has been pushed up because of the availability of some of these less than pleasant incidents that keep happening. The fact that it seems to me that some teachers are sharing their personal opinions in classrooms more than ever before. So it all depends on the maturity level of your child, Megan. So for example, like my children are 13, 9, and 7. So maybe I don't need to have that conversation with my 7-year-old, but we have talked to definitely my 13-year-old, because she has had some incidents at school where, being biracial, where people have said that she's whitewashed, and people have said all kinds of just crazy things that are basically trying to force her to pick a side. Are you white or are you black? Are you with us? Are you not? And the fact that that's still happening is just ridiculous to me, So, the fact that my daughter is well-spoken, you talk white, that's something that I heard when I was a child. Oh, you sound like you're white, because my father and my mother were very adamant about us not using slang all the time, making sure that we were properly pronouncing our words, because they said when we get older, it'll pay off if you sound like somebody who means business when you're sitting in an interview. And to that point, Paul made a comment earlier. He brought it up. I didn't. Paul Shastany, he's a former police chief of mine, and he said that I was one of the best interviews that he ever had. Well, that didn't happen an hour before that interview. That happened because that training started early on in my life, by my parents having those expectations and making sure that we were taking care of business as best we could. As being a good student, even though I was not a good student, but I was a good citizen, in making sure that we mastered the English language. So long-winded answer, Megan, but that you got to start young, and you have to measure the maturity of your children. Guys, you have a quick comment one way or the other on that, Pedro?
I feel you, Dean. I've been told that I sound like a Jake, not a Pedro. So, I completely understand,
So
when you
Jake
sounded-
meaning like a white guy named Jake, or Jake a cop? Because
No,
Jake is a derogatory term for a cop too.
No, like a white guy, just,
Okay.
so I've gotten that a lot.
Andrew, how about you?
I've never been told I sound like a white guy. But my name, Andrew Ward is, it's my father's from the Bahamas, so we got a British name. So Bahamas is a British colony. So, he always said, well, I'm naming my children names that are not going to be anything crazy, because again, when you submit your resume or whatever, you don't want to get rejected right out the gate just because you might have some name that, hey, there might be some racism out there by whoever's hiring, unfortunately.
Well, let's get into some of the tougher questions here, okay? Enough of the softballs. All right, so the first question I have is, when did you, so I'm going to go to Andrew. When did you first learn about the Black Lives Matter movement and the organization, and what were your initial thoughts when you first heard of it? So just give us a basic summary of that.
Yeah, so, when we were kind of discussing before we got on live, some of the Black Lives Matter movement and what our thoughts were, and you had sent some information about the organization. I said, I don't want to read it. I've only heard things kind of casually or hearsay, so to speak. And to me, it's somewhat concerning because it's taking away from the focus of what I would believe should be at the center, which is Black Lives Matter. So it's a pretty basic statement. With just a couple of words. So anything that's going to back up the statement of Black Lives Matter, again, has to be measured and tangible. And it also, I'd be interested to know, who's running the organization. So some of the things, again, that I'm hearing that float out there don't necessarily mix or tie to this statement of Black Lives Matter. There seems to be kind of a, I guess we can call it a mission drift or what have you. Including other races or other, it's talking about homosexuals or what have you, which doesn't necessarily speak to what Black Lives Matter and those three words put together indicate, what the focus would be. So I think it's a little disjointed what's going on within the organization with what I would believe, in my personal opinion, what I believe the focus should be.
Pedro, same question to you. When did you first learn about BLM, and what are your thoughts about it when you learned about it? Oh, you're muted there. Hold on one second. Okay, there you go. Go ahead.
Sorry, it might have been me. The baby's crying a little bit in the background, so I didn't want to. I want you guys to catch a wind on it. So I think I heard about it around 2013. The organization itself, I wasn't so sure about I guess I wasn't keeping up with it so much as, I've come to find out they started right about 2013, but the movement itself I knew about in 2013, but I didn't realize they actually have like a legit like LLC and what have you for the organization up until probably earlier this year. But, I think it's a great movement. They're looking for equality. I know there's, as Andrew was stating, there seems to be, as far as some of their mission statements or their what they're calling their guidelines or what have you. I think when they mention queer affirming or trans affirming, I think they're just trying to they're just looking to seek equality. That they're not sending any kind of discrimination versus any kind of Black person, right? Because sometimes those three don't always get along. So I think they wanted to make it clear that they were an organization accepting of all Black people, no matter if you were trans, gay, Black, gay or lesbian, it didn't matter. So, I think the overall movement in itself is great. I think they're making some progress. I don't particularly agree with their defund the police strategy, but I think they're trying to work ways around it. I believe there needs to be some type of police reform, but according to them, they've tried that for years, and that's why they're going for defund the police. But again, I would still need to do some more research on that part to really understand what's been driving that. Like what work have they put in to make them to come to the conclusion that it needs to be completely defunded. So,
all right. So I guess it's only fair I answer my own question here. All right. So here's my 2 cents on that question. So I was first made aware of BLM, I'm going to say probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Was it for the 2016 ish? They really came out, after a year or two after the Michael Brown incident, is when they really hit the ground running. And at first, I got sucked in by the name, and I heard Black Lives Matter, and I'm like, all right, I'm in. Black Lives Matter, all inclusive. We're gonna get together. We're going to, we're gonna celebrate lives. We're gonna lift each other up. We are going to fight all different kinds of injustices, and we're also gonna call out bad actors in our own community. Because to me, Black Lives Matter, when I heard it, foolishly, I didn't research it. I just went by the name, and I thought it literally meant everybody. Now, I quickly found out that it did not mean everybody, and particularly me. So me, as a black cop, I'm in a black neighborhood, and I get shot by a black bad actor. I'm not included in that Black Lives Matter thing. I'm just some cop. I'm just some guy wearing blue that gets killed. And once I realized that, that's when I was like, I don't know about this. Because either we all matter or we don't. You know what I mean? If you're going to have a Black Lives Matter movement, you got to include the people that are trying to protect the black lives. I mean, it's crazy to me. Like, here I am. I've been a cop for 16 years, and I have been in a diverse environment my entire career. I started out as a Boston special. Then I worked at UMass Boston Police, and I worked at Boston University Police. Then I worked for the city of Manchester, New Hampshire, all places with robust black communities. So I've spent at least almost a third of my life protecting black lives. And now you tell me that I'm not included in this? So I had a very difficult time with that once I realized that. And there's example after example of black police officers that took this job to try to be an advocate and try to do better and say, hey, listen, there's injustice here and I want to try to fix it, but I'm not included in that. And again, I see what it's about now. I realize that it's about like one specific area where, where black people being killed in police encounters. But the name is very confusing to me, and that's what kind of got me into a bit of a jam when I finally realized what it was all about. And I think it all started with Major Lem, Lem Barney. So I'm not going to go into it, but if you're watching, please Google that name, Major Lem Barney. He was killed serving a high risk warrant in a black neighborhood by a black bad actor, and I don't think, outside of where he lived, I really don't think that was on the news at all. And that was a big wake-up call for me when nobody really seemed to care that this man got killed trying to make life better for black people in a community. And I'm going to say it was hurtful, is if I had to sum it up in a word. All right, so we're getting down on time. Believe it or not, fellas, it's been about 50 minutes, so I'm going to get to the question everybody wants to hear. So in a few minutes, I'm going to go to Pedro first and Andrew. Can you support the idea of BLM without actually supporting the organization as a whole? Does it need to be all or nothing? So, Andrew, go ahead. Can we treat it like an all-you-can-eat buffet and just kind of walk down and pick different parts of it? Or do we have to try the whole meal? Is it all-encompassing? Go ahead.
I think the consistency amongst what the three of our previous statements was that, hey, Black Lives Matter is an important statement. So, of course, we're going to support Black Lives Matter. And then, you see some of the comments coming in. It's like, yeah, if Black Lives matter, then they all matter. Correct. So I think that we as Black and brown people, how can we not get behind that? I don't think some organization can dictate to us what Black Lives Matter truly means just simply because they filed the name as an LLC, as we said, or whatever, or did some legal work behind the scenes or what have you. I think that the statement of Black Lives Matter is born out of the fact that, it's born out of emotion and frustration and things that have gone on in this country that have, left many of us feeling a particular type of way. And so, yeah, Black Lives Matter. Of course they do. But I don't think any organization has cornered the market on what that truly means. I made the statement earlier about, building wealth and family and community. Like, yeah, okay, so Black Lives Matter. So those should be some outcomes of that statement being made, that they matter and that we should improve our situations, not only for ourselves, but for our children and our grandchildren and the other generations to come behind us. So they may not have to deal with some of the things that we've dealt with, or maybe deal with less of some of the issues that we've dealt with. So I don't think any organization can own that phrase, and that they have the right to own the phrase and dictate to us as a population what that actually means and what needs to be done in some particular box.
Well said. Pedro.
Yeah, how much? Yeah, I follow that up, man. No, yeah, it was well said. And I couldn't agree more, right? Like, I think we all can have our own stance on it, and I don't believe it's an all or nothing. And I think as we all try to educate ourselves on both topics here, right? I mean, it's about educating yourself on what the Black Lives Matter movement is, but also the organization itself, and understanding where they're coming from. And as I've said, I don't agree with the defund the police, but I also, when they mention all these different cases, there's so many different variables. If you actually read into them and find out what the true stories are behind them, sometimes you got to look at it and say, yeah, maybe that was the right thing to do, was to shoot that person. Based on the circumstances. I don't think I'm not even going to give that a percentage of when that's right or wrong. But if you look into it, I think in most cases you could debate or argue that, yeah, maybe the police officer had it right there. But I do think there is an issue with some of there needs to be some type of police reform. So, and I think that's what they're looking for. But I don't think defunding it is the process. And I think that's one of their big pushes. But again, as Andrew said, when the statement is Black Lives Matter, it's for all Black lives. That's cops included. Like, it shouldn't be anything different.
100%. So the part that I left out, because let's face it, the fact that I could go to work and not make it home is probably a little more. It could happen to anybody. You could be a stockbroker, you could be a taxi driver, you could flip burgers, whatever, and something could happen to you on your way home. I can tell you that from a plethora of experiences where I've had to have difficult conversations with families where they thought someone was coming home, and I had to tell them that person is never coming home. So it can happen to anybody, but I think a lot of people like yourselves, family men, businessmen, black middle class, upper middle class, not class, but income folks don't realize that I'm not included in that, but neither are you two. So if you two get hurt, shot, killed, or whatever by somebody who looks like us, guess what? Black Lives Matter ain't going to be talking about you either.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that I think a lot of other people need to realize too. Like, it's only for that small circumstance of people that are getting killed in police encounters, and that's a bitter pill to swallow. I mean, we got a businessman that referees basketball on his time on his off time, and we got another guy over here that's doing the financials for one of the largest church organizations in Eastern Massachusetts. And clearly, some of that stuff you're doing, I mean, yes, you're getting paid, but you're doing some other stuff that's on your own time and your own dime too, for a church that has a very large Black membership. And if you got killed tomorrow by somebody that looks like us, and let's face it, statistically speaking, that's much more likely to happen than you getting killed by a cop. Nobody's going to say a word about that. And that, like I said, that for me is problematic. Like Andrew said, if the goals and objectives were more clearly defined. It doesn't seem like there's really like a plan as to how to accomplish anything. Maybe people could understand it a little bit more. So, I mean, there's just so many different ways to look at this. And I think a lot of people, black and white, that are in my life, that are in the area where you grew up, Pedro, and Andrew, where you and I live, can get their head around some portion of this, that Black lives do matter, but they need to be a little bit better plan. I think that, in that video we showed earlier where they had all those different names up, not every incident's the same. Like, you can't compare Jacob Blake to Philando Castile. And for those of you that aren't familiar, Philando Castile was the gentleman that was killed, and I believe it was Minneapolis.
Yeah.
When his girlfriend was Facebook Living the traffic stop, and he was a licensed gun owner, and he explained to the police officer that he had a gun on him, and next thing you know, he shot and dies. Awful shooting, a terrible use of force, criminal use of force. You can't compare that to Jacob Blake, who had a criminal warrant and, oh, by the way, had a sexual assault charge and needed to be taken into custody. Oh, and by the way, they found him there because the woman that lived there called the police looking for help because of the way he was acting. You can't compare the two. Whether you like the tactics or not, that's not the discussion. The fact is that they were there to arrest him. One way or the other, he was getting arrested because they legally had an obligation to arrest him because he had a warrant. That's what a warrant is. A court says you shall arrest this person. So how do you arrest somebody that decides they don't want to go to jail? That's a question for another time, folks. So again, we're up against it right now. We're at the bottom of the hour. Andrew, Pedro, thank you guys so much. This has been fantastic. I hope people got something out of this. I hope people realize that now. I'm not going to say that we've given anybody permission, but we've kind of shown people that you can take different bits and pieces from all of these organizations, not just Black Lives Matter, can be Blue Lives Matter. There are some people that support Blue Lives Matter that really, I want to go up to them and say, please don't support us. You're a bad boy. Like, we don't want your support. You are an awful representation of what real cops that care about their communities are about. Just like I'm sure that there's people in the All Lives Matter. The whole point is there's people and there's bad apples in every bunch. There's no way to get away from it. As long as there's a human element in anything we do, you're going to have people that are going to slip through the cracks. Just the way it is. So 30 seconds, potting shot, Pedro. Anything else you want to say before we go?
No, honestly, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I respect the work you do for sure. And honestly, anytime I hear about these stuff, I think about you. And I hope, that you're safe and mentally you're there and you're healthy in that aspect. So that's my biggest concern. I appreciate you bringing me on.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you asking about my health. Believe it or not, doing this, though it can be stressful and there's a lot riding on it sometimes because you don't want to get up here live and fumble all over yourself. But this is helpful for me to talk about this stuff and to have these conversations with people that are willing to hear two sides of a story. Andrew, potting shots.
Again, thanks for having us on, and thank you for your service. Your time away from your family that you spend to protect our community is appreciated. I think we talked about a topic tonight that's somewhat of a touchy subject, and I think we gave a transparent, real view into what real people think, and I'm glad we were able to do that in this forum.
Guys, thank you so much. I need one thing from you both. I need a commitment that when we revisit this subject or maybe something else down the line, maybe we do a parenthood episode about the difficulties of parenting. Maybe you guys think about maybe coming back like that when I put together another panel. Would you be willing to come back on and talk again? You guys were fantastic.
No doubt.
Sure, absolutely.
All right. So thanks you to everybody that tuned in and took time away from your family to hear this very important conversation and this very important topic. We're just getting started, so please keep coming back, supporting these difficult conversations. Brought to you by Supply the Y. Good night, everybody.
Take care.
Take care. Good night.